We are taking a look at the AYA NEO Geek, which is more of a budget version of the AYANEO 2. We will be comparing the difference between the two models, performing some system and gaming benchmarks, then comparing the results. We finish by playing some games recommended by our viewers and then our final thoughts. But before we get started, please take a short moment to subscribe to us if you have not already. We are very close to 10k and we need an excuse for us to celebrate in the pub on a Friday. We got a great response in the last video, so thanks if you did subscribe. AYANEO knows how to box a product. Inside we have some user guides which help you get started with the handheld and ISP software. Underneath is the AYA NEO Geek itself. We will show this in more detail in a moment. On the bottom is a 65-watt charger with plug adapters for just about everywhere in the world. There's also a USB Type-C charge cable and two USB Type-C to Type-A adapters, which are handy to have. The AYA NEO Geek measures 10.3 by 4.1 by 1.4 inches at its thickest. It is slightly larger than the AYANEO 2, but both weigh around 680 grams, so there's no difference there. On the model we are reviewing, the screen has a 7-inch slim bezel touchscreen with a 1200p resolution. An 800p resolution is also available. Whilst the screen quality is very good, it does have a slightly lower vibrancy and colour in comparison to the amazing AYANEO 2 display, which is the best we have seen on a handheld so far. We will compare them later in the video. On the front we have Hall effect analog sticks along with the usual gaming buttons. There are two additional buttons which are used for the ISpace overlay and custom functions. Along the top we have Hall effect triggers and shoulder buttons. There's also two small buttons which can be configured for custom key presses. The power button also functions as a fingerprint sensor for added security and fast logging into Windows. There is a volume rocker and two USB Type-C ports. On the bottom there is an additional USB Type-C port which you can connect to the official AYANEO dock. There is also a micro SD card slot and a 3.5mm headphone port. The AYA NEO Geek features the excellent AMD Ryzen 6800U processor with AMD Radeon 680M graphics. We know from the AYANEO 2 and other handhelds that we can expect some great gaming performance. There's options for 16 or 32 gigs of LPDDR5 RAM and 512, 1TB or 2TB of high-speed SSD. For communications we have fast Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.2 to connect peripherals with. In our tests whilst running the Cinebench benchmark we got a highest temperature of 45 degrees Celsius and highest fan noise of 69 decibels. With the 50.25 watt hour battery we got exactly 1 hour at full load at 28 watts TDP and 4 hours 35 minutes idle on the desktop at 28 watts TDP. Here is a quick comparison of the differences between the two models. The largest change, apart from the display, is perhaps the use of PCIe 3 instead of 4 on the Geek. There are differences in the vibration, gyroscope and fingerprint modules used, which in my opinion are not so important. There has been some discussions about Hall effect sensors and controls in general recently, in particular the potential dead zones. Just as we were recording this review, AYANEO released an update for their ISpace software, which applies to the dead zone. You can now switch off or on dead zone compensation of sorts. When it is switched off, we can see on the Gamepad Tester website that we get fairly accurate movement based on our input. We can however see that when fully going in one direction and releasing the joystick that we do not always return to around 0 on the axis. With the dead zone compensation switched on, we can see different results. Moving the stick will jump from anywhere between 20 to 28% before registering, but if we let go after going fully in any direction, it essentially returns back to 0. So you can now decide to have more accurate, or say an average of 25% less accurate initial input when switched off or on. I would say that it depends on the game you're playing whether or not you need accuracy, but the options are there for what you want to use. It's good to see AYANEO addressing this. A brief mention for ISpace if you're new to the AYANEO handhelds. ISpace is a great front end for the handhelds that transforms it into a more console-like experience. The front end scans your drives for games and adds them to the launcher. You can change many settings and also update the firmware. Whilst in game, you can press the IR space button, which brings up an overlay with shortcuts to commonly used settings, such as the fan speed, TDP, screen resolution and more. We will be covering the smart TDP feature that was recently introduced in a separate video. Essentially, it dynamically adjusts the TDP on demand, which helps to save battery power, as well as downclocking the CPU to let the GPU perform more optimally when needed. AYANEO are working all the time on this software with new features, and it gives their products a very polished look and feel compared to their other manufacturers. We start our benchmarks with some system tests to give us a look at the overall performance, which we can compare with other 6800U based handhelds at 20 watts TDP. Starting with PC Mark, which tests your more day-to-day usage from web browsing to working with office documents and media processing. We see that the AYANEO Geek scores 6224 compared to the AYANEO 2 6384. There is around a 2.5% difference, which if we run the benchmarks again would probably have slightly different results. Cinebench tests the CPU performance, and for this we are running the multi-core test. The Geek scores 10,710 and the ANEO 2 scores marginally higher with 10,989, giving us another 2.5% difference. 3D Mark tests the CPU and GPU to see how well they perform together. On TimeSpy we get a 1.5% difference in results. For Night Raid we get 1.1% difference, and for Firestrike we get next to nothing at 0.1%. Overall, there's very little difference in the system benchmarks. We can see from identical up to a 2.5% increase in favour of the ANEO 2. You could rerun the benchmarks and get slightly different scores each time, so we will class these results as a near identical performance. For the gaming benchmarks, we will be performing them at the highest resolution of 1200p as well as 800p across 11, 20 and 28 watts TDP. This gives us a good range of resolutions and TDP levels for gaming for best quality through to battery life. Full disclosure here, we are comparing the benchmarks with the ANEO 2, which were performed in early November 2022. There's some differences in the results depending on the test due to different drivers as well as game versions. So these benchmark results are only for reference and should not be taken as absolute. We are testing Forza Horizon 5 on the low graphics settings. It is here where we can see some difference in the benchmark results when compared. There's noticeable differences at 1200p across the TDPs, but at 800p the Geek one is 1 frame per second faster. We have no idea why. Overall the frames per second still remain very good across the different tests. The Shadow of the Tomb Raider benchmark results are very close, with just a few frames either way across the tests. We of course can run them again and have different results each way, so overall it's identical performance. Next we are testing Cyberpunk on the default low graphics settings. We get some decent scores across the 4 benchmarks and a frame or two above the ANEO 2 on some. Finally, we are testing Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 on the minimal graphics settings with no upscaling. Across the tests, we can see a decreasing gap between the two handhelds as the TDP lowers. We can see from the benchmark results that Forza and Call of Duty add some lower scores on the Geek, whilst Tomb Raider and Cyberpunk perform pretty much the same as the ANEO 2. We can put some of this down to different game versions and drivers, as everything else including system benchmarks check out fine. So with the AYANEO Geek you are getting roughly the same performance as the ANEO 2 and other handhelds such as the GPD Win 4 and 1X Player Mini. Check out our best gaming handheld PC video linked in the description if you want to compare the results. For our game performance test we are testing some of our usual games plus a few that were suggested by our viewers. For these we are playing at 2 levels, one for best quality whilst aiming at 60 FPS or above, and secondly the settings for best battery life. It has been some time since I last played Warframe, so thanks to Eastern Critter for the suggestion to check it out. You can run the game at 1200p on the high graphics settings and for the most part have 60 frames per second. It plays great at these settings. If you want to save battery then you can go to 800p medium graphics at 11 watts. I think you could go even lower with some more tweaking. For Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, I recommend 800p 28 watts with balanced graphics and no upscaling for the campaign. If you are playing online, then 800p on the minimal graphics with no upscaling gives you the best FPS whilst the graphics still look clean. You could drop the TDP a little to save battery life and limit the frame rate. I have not played Starcraft 2 at all before, and it was suggested by MattCosmo87 to try this game. At 1200p on the extreme graphics quality at 28 watts, I was getting well over 100 FPS. You can go as low as 800p low graphics at 11 watts and still get over 300 FPS. So you could drop the TDP even lower if you wanted to and limit the frame rate. Either way, you will have no problems running this game. Overwatch 2 runs great at 1200p 28 watts TDP on the high graphics with no upscaling. You may see an occasional frame drop here and there, but nothing game breaking. For the best battery life, you can drop the settings to 800p 11 watts TDP on the low graphic settings. Emulation performance is much the same as the AYANEO 2. You can run everything up to the Dolphin emulator era with no issues at all. We will take a brief look at some of the higher end emulators. Overall, we get very good performance from the PlayStation 3 emulator RPCS3. Many of the games we tried were running at full speed. There may be some shader caching slowdown now and again, but other than that, we had no issues playing the games. For the Ryujinx and Yuzu emulators, we saw decent performance on compatible games. You can squeeze some extra frames by changing from docked to handheld modes. Older and less demanding games work great. You may see slowdowns on the more demanding games though. The Xbox 360 emulator Xenia is very much work in progress, but we do see some of the games running at full speed for the most part. Performance and compatibility may improve over time, so this is more of a test to see how it's progressing. Overall, the AYANEO Geek is very impressive. I have been switching between it and the AYANEO 2 over the past few days, and to be honest, I do not feel much of a difference in terms of the quality or feel. Both are very comfortable to play on, and the controls are just as responsive as each other. In terms of performance, again there's not much of an overall difference. I was able to play the games at the same resolution and graphic settings as the AYANEO 2. Some benchmarks do show noticeable gaps in performance, but when it comes to actual gameplay, it's barely noticeable. It is hard to show on video, but side by side we can see that AYANEO 2's display is slightly more vibrant and brighter. But there is not a great deal of difference when not comparing and actually playing. This isn't to say the Geek's display is bad, it's the same level as all of the other handhelds out there and is perfectly good quality. It's just that the AYANEO 2 display appears to be just better. We do not have the 800p display model yet to test, so keep an eye out for the comparison when it's available. Is the AYANEO Geek worth buying over the AYANEO 2? You can save yourself a fairly decent sum of money for what is, in my opinion, little difference between the two. The other main changes are the PCIe 3 SSD and lower featured fingerprint sensor, vibration and gyroscope. For me, they are not so important and again make little difference to me and my overall experience using the AYANEO Geek. For these reasons, I would definitely consider the AYANEO Geek over the two and save some money in the process. Let us know which of the two handhelds you would buy and why in the comments. We are always interested to hear our viewers' opinions. And don't forget, you can save 5% when ordering your AYANEO Geek from us at DROIX.co.uk and DROIX.net for worldwide shipping. Enter AYANEO Geek on the checkout for the discount. Please note that codes are not valid during store sales or promotions. That wraps up our review of the AYANEO Geek. We hope you have found it useful. Please subscribe if you have not already. We want to reach that 10k soon. Thanks for watching and we hope to see you back in our next video.